So I've got a question for you. When you think of the book of Exodus, what are some of the first things that come to mind? And the reason I ask that is because I want us to take a look at the Hebrew word shemot, which is actually what Exodus is called in the scrolls. For me, whenever I think of the Exodus, I think of the 10 plagues. Obviously, I'm going to think about the children of Israel that leave Egypt, but also I think of some more of the finer details. I think of the Nile River. I think of the decree that there was going to be the death of the generation of the boys that were cast into the Nile River. There's a lot of things that we find in the book of Exodus that point to things happening later on. And it's not to say that this is the sub story and we're waiting for the real one. These elements point to one another, and that's one of the things we're going to take a look at as we dive into the commentary on the book of Exodus. But I want this to be a short little episode. I want us to take a look. I'm going to call this Walking into Exodus. And I want us to take a look at the word Shemot in Hebrew, which is 4 letters long: Shin, Mem, Vav, Tav. Now, Shemot actually derives its name from the word names. Actually, Shemot means names itself. And it takes the title from one of the very opening verses in the book where it talks about these are the names of the children of Israel who went down to Egypt in the famine. But if you take a look at the first 2 letters, Shin and Mem, that is the word for name, just like the son of Noah, Shem. If you take a look at the last 2 letters, that's a Vav and a Tav. And of course, if you know some of the Hebrew meanings and what the characters and letters represent and mean, I want us to take a look at a couple of things involving that. So you have Shem, which means the name. So what name is associated with the Vav? And mind you, the Vav, this is the letter that is in the perfect shape of a Roman nail. And so what name is associated with the Roman nail? Before we answer that, let's look at the final letter of the word, which ironically is the final letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which is Tav. And the meaning of Tav and even the shape of it back into its ancient history, back in the time of Moses, was actually in the shape of a cross. So, Exodus, one of the things that it helps do, it helps prepare the way for us as readers and help with our understanding, is that it's going to help us recognize and relate to a name that is associated with a Roman nail and a cross. Of course, with us Christians, we're going to say Jesus. But I also want us to take a look at something else as well. Say that you were to take the first letter off of Shemot, you would be left with Mem, Vav, Tav, which is actually the word moot. It's the name for death. You've actually heard people talk in conversation about how, oh, this is a moot point. That's going to mean that it's a dead point. There's not going to be any life for this conversation because we're about to hit a dead end. Again, moot means death. Well, if you take a look at the shin, it's actually in the shape of almost like a stick figure fire. Matter of fact, shin means to consume, it means to destroy. And so part of what we're going to find in the book of Exodus is that there is going to be this consuming of death. And I think it's interesting that just with the name of the book of Exodus, even though it's 4 words, we can find elements, we can find traces, hints, whispers of being consumed with the death, and also a name associated with the Roman nail and a cross. Let us find it in no instance of something by accident where we find Pharaoh putting out this decree that there's going to be these young boys, these young children who are supposed to be killed, thrown into the Nile. He's going to eradicate this part of the generation. What do we find on the back half of the book whenever we find Jesus' generation? There's this evil king, this evil ruler who puts out a decree to put to death a certain age element of boys under the age of 2. Do you remember Moses' first miracle? One of the very first signs that he did in the land of Egypt? He turned water into blood. When you get into the Gospels, you get into the book of John, what was Jesus' first miracle? He also turned water into something else. He turned water into wine. Bonus points if it was red wine. I don't think text actually tells us. But whenever we go through this commentary that we're going to unpack here in the future over the book of Exodus, I'm going to be looking at elements that point us not just into the Exodus itself. We're going to unpack a lot of things that's going to provide us a lot of surprising details. But of course, I'm also going to show how this helps point forward to other elements that we as Christians are familiar with. So thank you for this brief time. Hope you have something to think about here. Have a good one. Be blessed.